Okay, good evening, everybody. Okay, if you remember, we were on Hey Omid Aleph 5a. Just a reminder where we were up to, really, part of the discussion. We had said that a sukkah has to be minimum, the walls of a sukkah have to be a minimum of 10 tefachim, 280, 80 centimeters minimum. Yeah, any lower than that is called a dira tsurucha, an unpleasant dira, and no one's expected to stay in there, and therefore it wouldn't be a kosher sukkah. We then said, well, how do we know that 10 tefachim is considered to be the sort of minimum dimensions of a certain domain? And we said that's because this whole idea that Hashem doesn't descend lower than 10 tefachim from his domain to our domain, nor do we ascend above 10 tefachim, so to speak, into the heavenly realms. And we had a number of questions on that. We said there seemed to be certain pasukim that seemed to contradict that God descended onto the mountain, the Moshe Rabbeinu ascended up into the heavens. We said, no, all of those were within the 10 tefachim. Neither penetrated. Hashem never penetrated lower than 10 tefachim, and Moshe Rabbeinu never penetrated within 10 tefachim of Shemayim. So we agreed, okay, it's 10 tefachim. So we said, well, how do we know that it's 10 tefachim? So we said, well, we know 9 tefachim is from the height of the Aron, from the ark. How do we? Where's the final tefach? We said from the kapores, the cover, the ark cover, the lid on the ark. We said that's a tefach, thick, 8 centimeters thick. So Gemara said, how do we actually know that? We see here, we're in the middle of the line here. Yeah, it's about 8 lines up from the wide lines on Hey Omid Aleph. Gemara asks, let me find it in my Gemara now. Says the Gemara, Ella, says the line, Ella Kapores, so it tells us, the Torah tells us, Vasisa Aron Atse Shittim, so we're just beginning of that line where the quotation starts, Vasu Aron Atse Shittim, you shall make the Aron, the ark, out of wood, V'chatzi Oroko, Amasayim V'chatzi Oroko, its width should be 2.5 amas, V'ama V'chetzi Rochba, or its breadth, its length should be 1.5, V'ama V'chetzi Kamosan is 1.5 amas high. Says the Gemara, Ela Kapores Tefach Minalan. So we know the dimensions of the Aron itself, but where do we know the Kapores, that the cover itself was a tefach? So said the Gemara to Tanya, Rabbi Chanina, the Torah, Rabbi Chanina said, Kol HaKelim She'asa Moshe Nitna Behen Torah Midos Arakon Midos Rachum Midos Komason. All of the vessels that were for the Beis HaMikdash or the Mishkan, Moshe Rabbeinu, with the Torah gave Moshe Rabbeinu their measurements, their width, their length, and their height. However, Kapores Midas Orka Midas Rochbanit. Now, however, the cover, the Torah tells us its width and its length, Midas Komasa Lo Nitna. But its height, the Torah didn't tell us that. So says the Gemara, how are we going to know it? So says the Gemara, Seyulamad. 3 lines up from the wide lines. Okay, let's learn it from, we can derive it from the smallest of all the vessels in the Beis HaMikdash. Shneimar, as the Pasuk says also in Shemos, V'asita lo miskeres tefach saviv. Now the lechem hapanim, the shulchan, the table upon which the lechem hapanim sat, had a thing called a miskeres, a molding around it. And if I just stop this screen share and show you another screen, we saw it last time, I think it's just worth reminding ourselves. Just flipping between different screens. Can you see here? This is from the Temple Institute. This is the shulchan that had the lechem upon him on it. You'll see, obviously 4 legs on the table, but you'll see that the table had like a molding going all the way around it. Can you see this decorative molding? Can you see where the cursor is?
Yeah.
So this is a decorative molding that went all the way around. We'll also see that it actually has on top of it, on top of like the table surface, hard to see here, but a very small rim as well, little crowns that encircled it. So it wasn't a flat surface; it had you see with soft furnishings, you see like that braided edging, yeah, to make to decent off the edges to hide the join or the stitching. So this is what it had here. So it had this molding all the way around the outside, and it also had an edging that protruded slightly above the height of the table surface. For the moment, the Gemara is going to assume actually that this molding was actually at the height, was actually here at the top of the edge, the leading edge of the tabletop, not below it. So for the moment, we're going to suggest this actually is on top. So says the Gemara. I'll come back to this. Let me just share the other. Let's go back to the other screen so we know where we are. Of course, I've lost it now. I fear we're going to have to master Zoom again in the next few weeks. Okay, so says the Gemara, we are so the Torah tells us that when it comes to the shulchan, it should have this edging around it, this molding around it. Torah says this explicitly, tefach saviv, a tefach all the way around. So there we have one of the vessels, one of the things that went into the Beis Hamikdash, into the Mishkan, and it gives us the exact measurements of the smallest of the utensils. So says Gemara, Mala halan tefach, avkan tefach. Just as there with the molding around the shulchan, it was a tefach. Here also we can derive it as a tefach. Yeah, it was clearly that's obviously the minimum measurements that was utilized at tefach, and therefore let's learn from that where the Torah doesn't specify what the measurements should be. In the case for us, the thickness of the lid that went on the aron, let's learn that it was a tefach. So says the Gemara, the Nalef, last of the narrow lines, the Nalef mikelim gufayet. Let's not learn it, says the Gemara, from the decorative edgings of one of the utensils. Let's learn it from one of the utensils itself. Let's find something that has measurements and learn it from that. Yeah, meaning let's not look for the smallest thing to derive it from. Let's look for something much bigger to derive it from. Says the Gemara, we talked about this last time, it's just worth going over. The Gemara says, no, we don't do that. Why? Because we have a principle. Tafasta meruba lo tafasta, tafasta muat tafasta. We have a principle that when you're trying to acquire something, meaning you're not sure what quantity it should be, then what's the safest ground to be on? Taking a large amount or taking a small amount? Taking a small amount, right? Yeah, you take a small amount. We saw the Rashi, there's a very long Rashi. Rashi said, you take a small amount. If you're wrong, well, you at least know that's correct. If you're wrong and it should be greater than that, then you just add to it, no big deal. However, if you took a large amount initially and then you subsequently discover actually that was too big and you must give some back, then actually your initial taking was invalid anyway. It wasn't the right thing to do. So we have a principle which is, if you want to actually take the smaller amount, because you can always add to it. Don't take a big amount because you have to end up taking away. So here also, when we're searching around for a measurement, we go for the minimum measurement. We don't go for the maximum, biggest measurement. Otherwise, we'll have to say, if we find out actually we were wrong, we then have to reduce it down. So that's why we can't go according to that's why we can't use the kalim themselves to derive a measurement. We have to use the molding that was around the shulchan. So says the Gemara, okay, that's the case. But neilef mitzitz, we saw this last time. I know it's all part and parcel. But neilef mitzitz, okay, let's derive it then from another one of the kalim. Then from the tzitz, from the breast, from the head plate that the Kohen Gadol used to wear. The Sanya was taught in the Brisa. Tzitz dome kemintas shel zahav. This the head plate was like a golden head plate. Rachav base etzbaos. It was the thickness of 2 fingers. Yeah, Umukav me'ozen le'ozen, and it went all the way around from one ear to the other. Because of Allah, Beishitim, it had two lines of writing on it. We know we talked about this last time. One had Yud Hey Milmala, Hashem's name on top. V'kadesh Lamed Milmata, and Holy 2 below it. However, the Machokas, Rabbi Yossi, Ani Ra'isa, Baromi. He said, no, I saw the head plate when I was in Rome. They took me into their stores and they showed me what they'd plundered from Yerushalayim when they destroyed the Beis HaMikdash. The words Kodesh Hashem was written in one line. It was all written in one line. Okay, it's not relevant to us. But what is relevant, that we have an appurtenance of the Beis of the Mishkan that sits. We have its measurement. The measurement was 2 etzbos, 2 finger breadths, and 2 finger breadths is a half a tefach. So we have a smaller measure. So perhaps let's derive the thickness of the Aaron's covering from the tzitz, and it'll end up being less than a tefach. So what does the Gemara say? Middle of the 4th wide line. Danin kli mikli, vein danin kli mitachshis. No, he says, when we're trying to ascertain the dimensions of one kli, one utensil, one vessel, we compare it to another vessel. We don't compare a vessel to a tachshis. As Rashi, tachshis is Rashi, tachshis, milvush la'adam, a piece of clothing. The tzitz was something worn by the Kohen Gadol. It wasn't really a vessel in the Mishkan. It was a piece of clothing. You don't derive from a piece of clothing to a vessel. You derive from a vessel to a vessel. Okay, so we can't derive from that. So says the Gemara, okay, v'neilith mizer. Okay, let's derive it from the zer, the rim. And this is, again, going back to what I said earlier. You saw the picture, we saw the shulchan. Now we're talking about the little crown, the rim of crowns that actually was at the surface level of the tabletop and protruded above it slightly. To Amamar, because the masters taught, Zer Marshahu. The Zer, this crown, this rim of crowns, was a Marshahu, was the smallest of smallest things. It was a very small measure, maybe not even a quarter of a tefah. So why not learn it from there? Look at Rashi, Mizer Shel Aaron. So he says that's the Zer of the Aaron. So the Aaron had this rim going around it. The Shulchan also had it. Or Shel Mizbech, or Shel Miskeres Zer. So either it was on the Aaron on the ark, or it was on the Mizbeach, or Shel Miskeret Zer, or this rim of crowns. Ain't a kli, says Rashi. Rashi gives away the answer here. Rashi says it's not a kli, it's not a vessel. Ela tikkun kli, the kashtan. Rather, it is merely like a finishing off. It's like the finishing touches of the kli in order to decorate it. And that's what the Gemara says. Says the Gemara, no, we can't learn from that. Why? Danim kli mi kli, vein danim kli mi hachshe kli. We can when we want to derive the dimensions of a kli, we do it from a vessel. We do it from another vessel. We don't derive the dimensions of a vessel from that of the decoration of a vessel, a hechsher kli. Yeah, so that's no good either. Look at Rashi, hechsher kishet shulchanhu. So he goes back now to say it's actually part of the table. And I've seen it somewhere. Yeah, it was the decorative edge of the table. So we can't do it from there. So hold on a second. If we say we can't learn it from a decorative part of one of the vessels, and that goes into question something we suggested in the first place. We said, what's the first thing we suggested we can learn it from? Let's learn it from the miskeres, the rim, the decorative rim of the shulchan. Says the Gemara, if that's the case, if you're going to rule out deriving the dimensions from the rim, the decorative rim of crowns, because you're saying that's merely a decoration, the miskeres nami hechsher klihu. Then the miskeres and the rim of the table is also merely a decorative piece, and you can't derive the dimensions of a kli from a hechsher kli. So says the Gemara now. This is why I said that initially the Gemara was thought that this miskeres around the table was at surface level, was surrounding it at the level of the tabletop. Now says the Gemara, no. No, he says the truth is this miskeres ran around underneath the surface of the table, as I showed you in the picture. Do you want to see the picture again? I'll show you again. Here, so now you can see. Here's the table surface. Can you see where the cursor is? This is the surface of the table. You see, running below it is the miskeres. The rim was actually at the surface of the table. This miskeres, this decorative surround, was actually below it. It says the Gemara. So it says Rashi. The mata hayasa mirega l'rega hayasa nutsuna barosham. This Rashi says, look at the legs. These are the four legs come up, and at the top of the four legs is this miskeres. It runs around the top of the four legs. And the surface of the table sits on top of it, meaning it's above it. This is below the surface of the table, as you can just see in the picture. And you have to make the screen a bit bigger. This is in the way. If I can zoom in a bit. Zoom in the zoom. Does that help? Can you see that a bit clearer now? Mm-hmm. Yeah. So you can see there's a little bit of a gap between the top of the miskeres and the tabletop. The table is actually sitting on it, says Rashi. So there's a difference. Yeah. Says the Gemara, there's a difference. That this actually is, the Gemara is now suggesting the miskeres is actually a kli in of itself. It is something which is, although probably not technically, in appearance-wise, it seems to be binding the four legs together. It's as if you were to take the four legs and put a frame around it to hold them in place. And then you put the tabletop on top. So it is a kli in itself. That's what the Gemara is suggesting. Therefore, that's why we can learn from it. Says the Gemara, Hanicha lamanta alma miskeres lamata haisa. The Gemara, yeah, that's fine. That's only according to the opinion that says that the miskeres is below the table surface. However, according to the opinion, which is the first position that the Gemara took, which is that the miskeres was at table, which is actually above the table surface. What are you going to say? It comes back and the Gemara spells it out 3 lines up from the bottom. It ends up just being a hechsher kli, a decorative piece. Yeah, and if you look at Rashi says, "Anichach b'chulei palug to the menachos." It's machlokas in the Gemara menachos whether this rim was at table level or below it or not. So it'd be okay to say actually it's a kli in itself because it's below table, so that's fine. But that's not universally accepted because it's a machlokas in menachos. So you can't really base your measurements on something where there's a machlokas about it. So we're almost back to square one. Says the Gemara, 3 lines up from the bottom, middle of the line. Eladanim dava shenitna Torah mida, midava shenitna Torah mida. Rather, the truth is this: that when we want to derive the dimensions of something mentioned in the Torah, we can only derive it from something that's mentioned its dimensions are mentioned in the Torah. Because in fact, Tosfos says, as we're going to see, that the Torah doesn't give us the exact dimensions. They were given to Rabbanan. And therefore, and therefore, what rules out, so in truth, you could say, okay, that the miskeres is no better than the sitz, the head plate, and the zeh, the rim, because they're all hechsher kelim, they're all decorative pieces or clothing. The only difference is, says the Gemara, is that the Torah, when it comes to the sit and the zeh, the Torah does not give the measurements of it. And if you look at Tosfos, the bottom Tosfos, we just look at the first line, bottom Tosfos on the page, and we can't take proof from the head, from the sit, or from the zeh, because the Torah doesn't give the dimensions. But the Amar Le'el sits Rachav Shtei Esbaros, and you say, oh, hold on a second. The Gemara told us that the width of the height of the sits, the head plate, was 2 etzbaros, half a tefach. Says the Gemara, says Tosfos, Ein Zeh Ela Midrabanan. That's only rabbinically derived. It's not mentioned explicitly in the Torah. The Torah doesn't say what the dimension of the sits should be. And therefore, when we're trying to derive the dimensions of something which is mentioned in Torah, we can only derive it from something whose measurements are mentioned in Torah. And therefore, that excludes the sits and it excludes the zeh. Okay? So almost back to square one. Gemara continues. Okay, so where are we going to derive it from? So says the Gemara, end of the penultimate line, Rav Huna Amar. So Rav Huna says, Mehacha, let's learn it from a posuk. Let's derive it from a posuk. The posuk in Vayikra says, it's talking about the Kohen sprinkling the blood at the beginning of his avodah. It says, Al Panei HaKapores Kedma. He shall sprinkle it on the eastern face of the cover of the Aron. Okay? Says the Gemara, so the Torah uses the word al panei, on the face, the eastern face. Says the Gemara, ve'ein panim pachos mitefach, and there is no face which is smaller than a tefach. Meaning any face you would think of, look at Rashi, in panim shel adam, a human face is not pachutzi mitefach. No human face is smaller than a tefach, smaller than 8 centimeters, meaning an adult human face. Okay? So we know, so we're deriving from that. As it says, Al Panei HaKapores Kedma, since the Torah says on the face of the paroches, the kapores, the cover, it's talking about the face of the cover, meaning the width of its going around. If it's calling it a face, if it's saying that the kapores has a face, we know that the face can be not less than a tefach, so therefore it must be a tefach. Says the Gemara, ve'ema ka'apein, turn over, deva yochani. Well, let's say, if you're going to say we derive it's the dimensions of a face, let's say it's the face of a bar yochani. Says Rashi, what is a bar yochani? Says Rashi, top left-hand corner of the Gemara, oif gadol hu ma'od, a very large bird. There's a huge bird that obviously had a very large face. And the Gemara in Bechoros tells us, what about this bird? How big was this bird? I mean, Pama'achas. It once happened. Hitilu ba Yochane beit sabim komeinu. This bird, this Bar Yochani, deposited an egg in our place, as the Gemara, but avar shishim karachim. And obviously it broke. And what came out of the egg was so much that it sunk 60 towns or villages. V'shvira shin arazim, and it broke 300 cedar trees. I think we're talking here, it's Lashon Guzma, again, it's a rabbinic or Talmudic hyperbole. But basically what it's saying is this egg was so large that its contents could have drowned hundreds of cities and broken 60 cities and hundreds of towns. So this bird clearly had a massive head. So why not? If we're saying that the kapores has a face, and well, let's say it's the size of the face of this massive bird, way more than a tefach. So what's the Gemara going to answer? It's an obvious answer because we've had it already. Says the Gemara, tafatsta meruba lo tafatsta, tafatsta muat tafatsta. That when you try to seize a lot, you don't end up seizing anything. When you seize a little, you seize it all. Again, We don't know whether it's a large, the tefach is, sorry, the dimensions are going to be large or not. But we know for shorten it's at least going to be the smaller dimension. So let's stick with the small dimension for the moment. And if at some point in the future we have to increase it, we'll have to increase it. But we can't start with a large dimension and then at some point say, you know what, the lid is too thick and we need to reduce it. So we have to go according to the small face size of the tefach and not according to the big size face tefach, big face. Gemara doesn't give up and carries on. Says the Gemara, "Ve'ema ka'ape desiparta de zuta tuva." Okay, let's find a very small faced bird and say that the dimensions of that bird's face is we can derive from that the dimensions of the face of the ark cover. And I think Siport obviously is the Hebrew word for a bird, but also could be a sparrow, a very small bird, right? Have a very small face, much smaller than a tefach. So perhaps it's that. So says the Gemara, Amar Rav Acha bar Yaakov, Rav Huna Pnei Gamit. Says Rav Acha bar Yaakov, Rav Huna derived it actually from a Gezerah Shava. How do we know what is the size of a face? He derives it from two Pesukim. Pnei. We have one pasuk that says Pnei HaKapores, the face of the paroches. Yeah, says Gemara. Ukasiv Hacha al Pnei HaKapores. We said here on the face of the Kapores. Ukasiv Hasam, and it says in Bereshis, Me'ez Pnei Yitzchak Aviv, from the face of Yitzchak his father. Both Pesukim have the word Pnei in them, face. We know that Yaakov had a human face. What do we say the minimum dimensions of human face is? A tefach. And therefore, we can say that from a Gezerah Shava, Rav Huna learns that just as a human face is minimum a tefach, so too the dimensions of the face of the paroches, the cover of the Aron Kodesh, is a tefach as well. Yeah. Gemara then challenges that. I'm just conscious of the time. Let me just I'll just summarize very quickly. We haven't got time to go on. Gemara says, well, hold on a second. We've got other places we can derive the word face. We can derive it from the word face of the celestial beings who are perhaps smaller than the human beings. We're going to look also about the kruvim, the cherubs also, were they the face of children or the face of adults? In fact, I was going to suggest that the word kruv comes from the word ruvia, like a ruvia, and ruvia in Loshen Arami in Babel, it was what they used to call a child, a ruvia. So ruvia, keruv, like that of a child, which could mean smaller than a tefach. So the argument is not finished; it's not over yet. Yeah, we're still not quite there as in terms of what is the dimensions of the face of the paroches. Because we need to ascertain what is the dimensions of a face and what face are we talking about. Okay. Sorry, I have to leave it there. Until next time, we will get back together at normal times. Keep well, everyone. Take care.
Thank you.